China commits to purchasing more American soybeans in day 2 of U.S.-China trade negotiations, but the details remain under wraps. RFD-TV's Sarah Mock breaks down the latest from the sit-down between the two world powers. Sarah?
Well, thanks, Janet. We are watching as those talks that started on Wednesday here in Washington have come to the end. They wrapped up yesterday with that Oval Office meeting between President Trump and the Vice Premier of China. He was here to hopefully move those talks forward. And we did hear from Robert Lighthizer, that's the chief U.S. trade negotiator, that those talks were very intense, very full days, and that they are moving forward very, there's a lot of progress made in as those talks move forward over the last couple of days. Now, the ambassador talked about some specific systemic issues that were addressed in these talks, including things like that intellectual property theft, cyber theft, and forced technology transfer. Those are the big things that the president has really been focusing on, but also on China increasing their purchase of U.S. agriculture, manufacturing, and energy products. Of course, the big takeaway for U.S. producers from that meeting was that China has committed to immediately begin the purchase of 5 million tons of soybeans. There was a bit of a confusion there with the translator, where initially someone said 5 million tons per day. That China has since clarified that and said 5 million tons in the short term is what they plan to be purchasing, which in effect doubles what they've bought since essentially this trade war has begun, but is still way off from the 30+ million tons that China bought, for example, from the U.S. in 2017. So we're looking to see that number go up significantly. But in that Oval Office address at the White House yesterday, we did hear the president reassure farmers and ranchers that their needs are still a top priority in these talks.
We won't have a deal if we don't open it up to the farmers. And we won't have a deal if they don't open it up to our manufacturers and just all of them. And I think China is very prone to do this.
Now, these discussions are still, of course, ongoing, with the president expected to potentially have a meeting with President Xi a little later this month, but he said that won't be until those deals are finalized. In the meantime, our U.S. Ambassador Lighthizer is expected to head to Beijing sometime mid-February. There will be a little bit of a break in the talks for the Chinese New Year, but we expect that, or we hear from the U.S. Trade Representative's office that those talks are basically still going on day by day, even as those folks are in the same city. But the White House did issue a statement yesterday after that meeting wrapped up, and we heard a little bit of that kind of cautious optimism in that statement. They said, quote, "While progress has been made, much work remains to be done. President Trump has reiterated that the 90-day process represents a hard deadline and that U.S. tariffs will increase unless the U.S. and China reach a satisfactory outcome by March 1st. Of course, that deadline still hanging over these talks as they move forward. And we did hear Lighthizer really be hesitant about that, saying it's too soon to tell whether an agreement can actually be reached. And I think his big takeaway comment from yesterday was, quote, enforcement, enforcement, enforcement. He's watching closely to make sure China kind of follows through on their promises. Janet?
As always, Sarah, thanks for keeping us up to date. And of course, we'll check back in with our D.C. News Bureau at 1 Eastern time for additional updates on the China trade talks wrapping up in the nation's capital. And as the purchase details do continue